open our FPDR board meeting. And first item on the agenda, I'm going to turn over to Sam.
Sam, okay. What I'd like to do today is, I wanted to extend our great thanks to Justin Delaney for all the work he's given on the Board of Trustees. I'd like to extend on the fact that the FPDR Bureau, the FPDR Board, as well as our members. Justin started as a trustee on January 1, 2007. He ended his term after 11 years last December with that. He started out, he was part of the first board created after the 2007 charter change, where it changed from 12 members to 5 members with that. So during his time on the board, Justin helped with a significant transition of all the charter changes and how it impacted and rolled through FPDR administration with that. That was quite a challenge for the first few years on the board to implement all the charter change. So Justin was a champion of all that. In addition to doing that, he oversaw, we had the 2007 fix to the post-retirement benefit, which had to go through a charter amendment, and then we had the 2000 charter amendment, which was the introduction of interim disability benefits, as well as clarification of final pay, which is a 27 pay period. We've gone through some more different cycles and turns on that particular issue, which Justin was part of also. During that time, he worked with 2 FPDR directors, me being the second one, obviously, and then he worked with 12 other board of directors during this time period. 12? 12 of them. I went and had to count the whole list of them. The thing about Justin, he was very impassioned about FPDR and the FPDR plan and the charter. Again, he was very committed to making the charter reforms in 2007 become reality. It created quite a bit of changes on how we did the disability plan, how we looked at other things in FPDR and its administration, and the shift down in the board and the board's role also changed at that time. Justin was very committed and impassioned on his various views during the time period. We had some robust discussions the board did on various topics, but Justin, along with the board, always came down to a solid decision based on what was best for FPDR, the plan, and our members. I was always impressed with the board, despite all the heavy discussion went on. It came down to a decision what was best for everybody else, and the contention, it got resolved at that point. So I think Jason is through a lot of these discussions also. So I appreciate the support that Justin has given myself. I came in here from 28 years in the private sector, and I had to learn transitions not only with my management staff, but also Justin helped me navigate getting into the public sector, what that meant, what are some of the politics I needed to watch out for. And also, the support you've given, I think, has been tremendous. I think there's been issues that we've all had to work through, and so I appreciate all the help on that. And so I'm honored to present you with a plaque. It's not a gold watch, but it is a plaque honoring your 11 years of service with that, and your dedication and commitment to FPDR and the fund.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Well, I am Dan Saltzman, Commissioner, and I just wanted to, on behalf of the mayor, and in fact I was just counting, you've served under 4 mayors now.
Outlasted them all.
Yeah. But on behalf of the mayor and the city council, we want to thank you for your 11 years of service. The Fire Police Disability and Retirement Fund is vitally important, not only to police and firefighters, but to the residents of Portland. And you have served us well in your 11 years through a period of change, as Sam just outlined, with charter amendments being passed in 2006, dramatically revamping how things are done here. And you've been on board from the start. Even when we were talking about charter amendments back in 2006, you were helping us to figure that out, but you also took us up on the offer to be one of our citizen members, and we really appreciate the work you've put into it. And I know that you've paid a lot of attention to this, and it matters a lot. And it's very important, as I said, to police and firefighters and the residents of our city. So just wanted to add the thanks from the City Council for your service.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
up and publicly talk about, Justin, you may, or you can go ahead.
Nelson, you can stay in your chair.
I'm more than publicly ready to. Nelson Hall.
This was a roast.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I hadn't thought about roasting him, but yeah. No, very quickly, on behalf of those members that I've had the pleasure and the honor of representing over the years, I have also appreciated the working relationship, the professionalism that you have brought to our dealings. And so I do want to thank you on behalf of those that I represent for your work on this board, and again, to emphasize your working relationship with me and with others that appear in front of the trustees. So thank you, and I'm going to take this second to say thank you especially for your support in the concept, the notion of timeliness and how the processing of these claims need to be handled. So thank you for your support.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks
Well,
again, Justin.
thank
Christian?
you, trustees. Good luck. You're in great hands with Liz Fouts. I promise not to show up more than once a year to testify as a citizen. I'll
Thank
be
you.
watching on TV.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thank you. And then as Justin's replacement, we have Elizabeth Fouts. Wave your hand, Elizabeth. That's the thing. So Elizabeth, you want to go ahead and give a little bit of bio on yourself and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm an attorney at the Standard. Can you hear me? Yeah. Like Justin, I'm an attorney at the Standard. I've been there for 10 years, and I head up the transactional attorneys, which are the business attorneys who support our retirement plans, as well as our insurance services group. So I have experience on both insurance side as well as retirement side of the business.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have a full complement of the board, and we will take care of one other administrative item before we move on to the rest of the agenda. Regarding the minutes of the November 28th, 2017 meeting, the minutes were in everybody's board book. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
I'll make a motion. We accept the November 28th minutes as presented.
Second?
I'll second that.
So we have a second. Are there any comments or changes or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, I'll take a vote for approving the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And no opposed, so the minutes are approved. And we'll move on as our normal custom to introduction of visitors. We normally start at the front of the room and make our way back. So Jennifer Cooperman with the City of Portland. We've just, go ahead. And just introduce yourself, and then we'll just come around the room.
Okay, sorry. Elizabeth Fouts.
Brian Hunsaker, representing the Portland Police Bureau.
Catherine McLeod, Citizen Trustee.
Jason Lehman, Fire Trustee.
City Attorney's Office.
Fpdr.
Nelson Hall, Bennett Hartman.
Fpdr, City Attorney's Office.
Warren Downhauer, outside legal counsel with Rookie Deacons.
Crystal Bucola, Police Liaison.
Frank Del Carlo, Fire Liaison.
Olivia Watman, Public Safety Member Group.
Thank you, everyone. Do we have anyone signed up for a public comment period? No public comment. Okay, then we'll move on to the action items, and the first item is to adopt the 2018-19 budget, which is in our packet, and there'll be slides up above.
Right.
So welcome, Stacy.
Hi. Good morning or good afternoon. Stacy Jones, Fpdr Finance Manager. Let me see if I can get this laptop a little closer over here, so I can advance my own slides. So I'm sure that you have all read the enormous documents that I sent you, and I'll just take questions. No, I'm just kidding. No, of course I'm here today to walk you through the 18-19 Fpdr budget that the staff is recommending to the board. The board does have the exclusive authority to adopt the FPDR budget. FPDR is the only city bureau for which council does not adopt the budget. That authority is yours. But we are a city bureau, and we do participate in this. We're an important piece of the city's overall budget, so we do participate in the city's budget process, which is why we're here now. We have to turn this budget into the city budget office on Monday, on January 29th. And whatever you guys approve will be in that, and then in the mayor's proposed budget, which is released at the end of April, and then in the budget that council ultimately adopts in June. Council does have authority to set the tax levy, so they are required to take what you tell them are our requirements, and they'll set the tax levy accordingly, because we are funded by our dedicated property tax levy. So what I'm going to go over today is the requested budget, and then also our forecast for the 4 years following that. We do a full 5-year forecast for our fund, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So before we get into kind of nitty-gritty, let me orient you to the major pieces of the FPDR budget. And I'm going to start with expenses, and then we'll turn to revenues. So these are our budgeted expenses for 18-19. It's about $166 million if we net out tax anticipation notes. And I know you're all tired of hearing me talk about tax anticipation notes, but every time we have a new trustee, I feel like I need to explain them. So really quickly, we're funded mostly by property taxes, and we receive most of our property taxes in mid-November. So we have to get from July 1, when the fiscal year starts, until the middle of November, when we get most of our property tax revenue. And there are two ways to handle that. One is to build up enough fund balance to get through those 4.5 months. The other way is to issue really short-term municipal bonds called tax anticipation notes, or TANs. You probably know that already. So that is the way that we handle our cash flow shortfalls. We issue TANs. When I talk about the budget, I like to net them out, because we got the TAN proceeds coming in on the revenue side, and then we have repayment in the same fiscal year going out on the expense side. So when you include those numbers, it kind of artificially inflates the size of our budget. So you'll often hear me talk about the budget net of TANs. I do, of course, still leave in the true costs of the TANs, which are interest and debt issuance costs. So little sidebar there. But net of TANs, about $166 million. The big takeaway from this slide is that we spend almost all of our money on pension benefits, which is not shocking to anyone who has been around FPDR. The biggest chunk are the pension benefits that we pay directly on a pay-as-you-go basis to the FPDR 1 and 2 members. That's in yellow. It's about 3/4 of our spending. The second biggest piece of the pie is in red, and that is the PERS contributions we pay for FPDR 3 members during their working lives to pre-fund their pensions in PERS. So that's for sworn employees hired 2007 or later. And that's...
Can I interrupt you real quick? So I'm looking at my book. Our numbers are different. So I have a property taxes, or my first page is this one. What page are you on?
I'm on slide 2.
The left-hand side of your book.
Oh, okay, it's buried underneath.
Yeah, I
was
think
on the wrong page.
I think we had a printing problem, a little bit of a printing problem in the board book. I'm sorry.
I was looking at the right page, which you're good. Thank you.
You were looking at the right or the correct?
I was looking at the wrong page on the right side.
It's going to get really confusing if we conflate our pension expenses and our property tax revenues. The fourth largest slide is what we call fund level expenses, and this is kind of a mysterious sounding term, but this is mostly contingency. About 10.8 million of that total is contingency. If you are living in your own fund, you are not living in the general fund that has its own contingency. There'll be some expenses in that category. It's fund transfers, general fund overhead, which is sort of an overhead administrative expense the city charges all funds, and contingency. Then after that, about 5% of the budget are disability and funeral benefits, and then about 2.5% of the budget are administrative expenses, which are, what they sound like: personnel, space rent, things like that. So the takeaway is we spend almost all of our money on pension benefits. Over 90% of what we spend is city charter defined benefits. So the FPDR budget is not really a policy exercise. It's more of a methodological exercise of have we forecast correctly? Have we applied the right assumptions? There's not a whole lot of discretionary decision-making over what we're going to spend our money on, like there would be, say, at the Parks Bureau, where you'd be saying, how much should we spend on recreation and how much should we spend on, fountains or something like that. Turning our attention to slide 3, this shows you the revenue side of the picture. And the take home here is that almost all of our money comes from property tax revenues, which again is what you would expect. The dedicated property tax levy is our primary funding source. If you consider that beginning fund balance is really just sort of unused property taxes from prior years, about 98% of our resources are property taxes. In the other 2%, the biggest chunk of the other 2% is interagency revenues from the Police and Fire Bureau. We get this money when fire and police contract with outside organizations, other governments, or private organizations to provide police or fire services. And then those organizations pay police and fire, not just the wages and benefits of the officers and the firefighters, but also an overhead rate. And a portion of that overhead rate is for pension and disability expenses, and so that flows through to us. Almost all of that money comes from the TriMet contract at police, which is the biggest example of Portland Police providing a service to an outside organization. Fire does have one little contract, but most of it is at police, and most of it is from TriMet. In the other category, 93...
Quick question on that. Do those expenses also include the contract work done by Portland officers to local businesses? Is that in there?
Yes.
As well? That's in there as well? Okay.
So the main pieces are TriMet, work for the housing, or it's called Home Forward now, right? Home Forward, the Portland Business Alliance, and then there are lots of other there's a gazillion little pieces. Whenever officers work overtime at a Trailblazers event or at a Fred Meyer location or all of that. So we kind of have the big chunks, which are ongoing contracts, and then the littler chunks that are all the special events. Actually, we'll talk about that a little bit more because we have adjusted that number for next year because of continuing staff shortages at the Police Bureau. So in that other category, 93% of that other category is interest income on fund balance. But there's also subrogation revenue, which is when third parties are at fault in a police or firefighter disability claim, and then they reimburse us for some of the medical expenses or time loss expenses. And repayment of interim disability benefits. We do start paying disability benefits on a service or occupational claim as soon as we have a complete claim. And on occasion, those claims are denied or withdrawn, and then the person has to repay the benefits. And when that crosses fiscal years, it gets booked as a revenue. So that is kind of in two pies, expenses and revenues, for people who like to look at numbers, which I know has to include at least our chair. Here are a whole lot of numbers. The rest of you can ignore them. This is the entire budget and forecast rolled up into major categories. We have a very, very long spreadsheet with excruciating line item detail that I can send to anyone who wants to see it, but I don't think you want to see that. So let me orient you a little bit. In the top half is resources in the categories we just talked about, mostly. In the bottom half are requirements, expenses, with total requirements running along the bottom. The first column is what we actually spent or received in the case of revenues in 16-17. The next column is our budget for the current fiscal year, which will end on June 30, 2018. The next column is what we project as of right now we're actually going to spend or receive in revenue in the current year. Next column is what we are proposing for the budget that will begin July 1, 2018 and end June 30, 2019. And then the 4 columns after that are what we forecast right now for the following 4 years. Final column shows the percentage change between what we are projecting for this year and the last year of the forecast, so you can see growth over the entire forecast period. At the very bottom is the budget net of TANs, so you can see it without the inflationary aspects of the TANs. So you can see that requirements are growing by quite a bit, about 54% over the forecast period if you include TANs. Now, part of that is real growth. Part of that is the TANs, because we always budget TANs really conservatively. We want to make sure we have enough budget authority to issue what we need. So actual TANs in the current year were a lot lower than budget. So some of that change is going from actuals to budget. If we look at the net of TANs numbers, that's more the real growth number, the 40% over the 5 years, and it's growing about 7% from this year to next year. And we will talk about why, but don't be alarmed. This is all planned. I mean, this is part of what we were just talking about when we were thanking Trustee Delaney. This is the transition from a pay-as-you-go pension plan that is now closed to a pre-funded pension plan, where we're beginning the transition of funding 2 generations of pensions simultaneously. So it's going to get expensive, and it's going to get more expensive as time goes on.
Before you switch to the next page, the line that is called fund level requirements, where am I going to find that in the pie charts?
That's almost all TANs, and so I stripped that out of the pie chart.
So the fund level requirements is the TAN line?
Is the TAN line, and I stripped that out of those pie charts because I didn't want to inflate.
Right.
But I'm also happy to send you the detailed line item on that, but yeah, that's what that is.
And
Okay.
Stacy, real quickly, unless you're going to get to this in the next little bit, what was the reason for the substantial increase between fiscal year end 17 actual and fiscal year end 18 projected, the 143 to 155?
The 143 to 155.
What maybe is the biggest 1 or 2 contributing factors?
The biggest contributing factors are pension expenses, direct pension expenses to FPDR1 and FPDR2 retirees.
And is part of that relating to the 27 pay periods issue?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a couple of things going on there, but we've had big pay increases, particularly at the Police Bureau, which drove up benefit costs in every single category. 27 pay dates, and just kind of what I would call our natural inflation, which is that our pool of retirees keeps growing and growing and growing, and will for quite some time until we start to have mortality in the FPDR2 retiree population becoming a factor. And at the same time, our FPDR3 PERS contributions are growing and growing and growing. So in a normal, kind of in a normal, everything is just normal year, we're going to see 6 or 7% growth just from normal cost inflation. And then we've had some additional factors.
It's also safe to assume that 25 years ago, we don't know what the hiring process was. So being a member of the police, there's been 4 or 5 years where we don't hire much. And then we have 2 or 3 years where we hire a lot. So obviously in that span, 25 years later, the pension is going to be hit more than a year where we didn't hire as many. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
So like prime example, right now they're going through a hiring phase that 25 years from now, although it won't be FPDR, it'll be PERS, they'll see a larger number. So that number fluctuates due to many factors, and that could be a general practice one as well.
Right, and so yeah, retirements, and we'll look at a retirement slide later. Retirements go up and down, a whole lot. And then working in concert with that and adding to the impact on the budget is that then hiring goes up and down a lot on the FPDR3 side. And every time an FPDR2 active working member retires, we get double hit. Now we need to start paying out a pension to that FPDR2 retiree on the pay-as-you-go basis. And now we just hired an FPDR3 member, we got to start making PERS contributions on. So the faster people retire and the faster we hire, we are essentially accelerating that transition from the pay-as-you-go to the pre-funded. So it is bumpy. It is bumpy. And then contributing to the bumpiness is PERS contribution rate changes, which are not a factor here. Oh yeah, they are a factor here because the rates went up between 16-17 and 17-18. That would be another factor, is PERS contribution rates go up every other year, which is nice in the sense that you have certainty in the second year about what your rate will be, but it creates bumpiness, which is a particular problem for us when we're trying to manage a tax levy. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well.
Okay, thanks for your look back.
You guys were interested in the numbers. Totally, not just the charts. All right, well now how about just words? No charts or numbers, just words. So I'm going to go through each of the pieces, the major pieces of the budget in a moment, but before I do that, I want to just step back and think about what are the major factors, the influences that are driving the forecast. We've just been talking about the number one factor, which is, so on this slide I talk about things that are continuing from prior years, but are the big drivers. Funding 2 generations of pensions simultaneously. This was what was intended with the 2006 reforms. We always knew that costs were going to go up dramatically, and they're going to continue to go up dramatically for the next 15 to 20 years. At that point, we will reach our peak moment when we'll be fully transitioned, but most of our pay-go population will still be living and we'll still be paying them benefits. And our entire sworn workforce will be FPDR 3 and will be pre-funding their pensions during their working lives. So that's the moment that we're building to, sometimes quickly, then we slow down, and then quickly. That is the number one driver of costs. So future taxpayers are going to benefit from this transition with lower pension expenses. But current taxpayers are bearing the burden of that transition, which will take an entire generation of public safety employees. Fortunately for us, at this time of really, rising costs, real market value growth in the city of Portland has just, it is just a phenomenon. I don't even know what else to call it at this point. So our property tax, the reason we care about real market value is that our property tax is capped, that we can charge at $2.80 per $1,000 of real market value growth. So we are always stress testing that levy to see if we're going to be able to stay under that 280 cap. Well, real market value has gone up 72% in the last 5 years. It was 80 billion in fiscal year ending 2012, and it's 140 billion now. So that keeps our rate low because we're spreading our charges over a much larger base. So at the same time we're increasing the budget pretty significantly, the rate is dropping. Has dropped every year for the last 5 years. It was $1.55 5 years ago, which I think it's dropped every year for the last 4 years. It's $1.13 now. We predict $1.10 next year. And over the whole forecast, we don't expect it to go above $1.25. That's a lot of real market value growth. And where it stops, nobody knows. This forecast does assume that it stops, but we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So those are the factors that have been present for several years, even decades, over a decade in the case of the transition. But I also like to talk about what's new and different and exciting. Well, exciting might be a stretch, but here are things that are new to the forecast that are causing some costs to go up. The biggest one is PERS rates. Now, we knew in prior forecasts that PERS rates were going to go up, but now they're going to go up even more than we thought in the past. So the rate right now for public safety is about 24.5%, and it'll stay there for next year. But for the 2 years after that, we had previously thought it would be about 27.5%. It's now going up to 30%. And I would say there's a high degree of confidence around that rate forecast. Then in the last 2 years of the forecast, this is the city economist forecast, we were assuming 30%, and now we're assuming 35%. So dumping those bigger PERS assumptions into the forecast adds about $13 million in costs for us. And remembering that the reason we care about PERS rates is because those are the contribution percentages we pay on FPDR 3 members. They're also connected. They're not the exact same rate that we pay on staff in the office, but that's minimal part of the problem. The other two factors are wage related, and they're much less consequential. Whenever active duty pay goes up, FPDR benefits go up in almost every category. Medical benefits are unaffected, and FPDR2 pensions for FPDR2 members already retired are unaffected, but every other benefit category just moves up in connection with increases in pay. So the first thing is that we will have a higher wage COLA than we were previously expecting on July 1st, 2018. All three sworn contracts require an increase equal to the CPIW, the Consumer Price Index for wage earners in the Portland-Salem MSA Metropolitan Statistical Area. Previously, we were thinking that was going to be 2.7. What's included in this budget is 3.8, but budget is still underway right now and being developed across the city, and we just found out last Friday that number, the real number will be 3.6%. So I think compared with what you received, that shifts this down to about 2.9 million. We just ran the numbers through as the additional cost rather than 3.6 million. So not quite as bad as we thought. But that is a really high number. It's been 6 years since it's been over 3%. So that's a pretty solid increase for the sworn workforce and most of the city workforce on July 1st. Another factor is that the PFFA contract is about to be implemented. So let me take a pause and talk about that, because I don't think that we've talked about that as a board yet. Portland Firefighters Association has not had a contract since June 30, 2016. The process wound up in binding arbitration, and the arbitrator's order was released on December 29th. So we now have a contract to implement. It includes retroactive wage COLAs of 1% going back to July 1, 2016, 2.2% going back to July 1, 2017. Those were anticipated in previous forecasts. We didn't know for sure that they were that was how it was gonna be, but that's how we decided to build our forecasts in the past. What we did not know about when we last did the budget and forecast, even though we've known for a couple of months now, but didn't know about a year ago, was a 1% increase in longevity pay for sworn fire employees. That only affects folks who have at least 10 years of service, so that kind of mutes the impact for us because very few of our FPDR 3 members have more than 10 years of service, so there's not a big cost impact in that category, but we have all the cost impact in all the other benefit categories. And over the long run, we'll have that impact in that category as well. So that adds about $1.5 million over the 5 years. Just as a side note, FPDR, we will be issuing retroactive benefit checks as a consequence of the arbitrator's order, about $550,000 over the next couple of months, $390,000 or so to FPDR 1 and some FPDR 2 pension beneficiaries, about $140,000 in retroactive PERS contributions, and about $20,000 in retroactive disability benefits. So that will hit, that reduces fund balance by a little bit, by about $500,000 this year.
Can you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you help me understand? I thought the tier 2 retirees weren't affected by this. Help me understand that.
Only the ones who have retired since July 1, 2016.
Okay, thanks.
Right, because their final pay, you got it.
Didn't reflect it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was I going to ask you? Oh, do you have the forecast on when those retro checks will be out for the retirees?
We are hoping to send out for the retirees in February. We are working on it right now, and we should be able to get those out real quickly. The disability side, we need to wait for the city, since we are wage replacement. We'll wait for the city official rates on those, and I don't have an estimate on that yet.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about kind of the big things out there ongoing this year that are kind of driving the budget? All right, now we'll walk through some of the big pieces, and we'll start with requirements, with expenses, since really the revenues are set to equal whatever we have decided our expenses are going to be. And we'll start with the biggest and just go down to the smallest. So our biggest category, FPDR 1 and 2 pension benefits, about 75% of our expenses, is going to go up about 6% next year. And as we were already talking about, that increases as more FPDR 2 active employees retire. And we have we have mortality on the FPDR 1 side, which I'll talk about, but very little mortality on the FPDR 2 side because they are younger. And they are retiring with higher final pay, even after accounting for inflation, because of most Portland police members are getting 3% pay increases above COLA, which winds up at about 9.27% higher final pay at the end of the day. And then there's been a little increase at fire as well. Also, 27 pay dates has an impact here. Anyone who retires in a 27 pay date month, that's about a 3.8% increase in their final pay over the regular look-back period final pay. So that's why FPDR pensions are going up. FPDR 1, on the other hand, we predict will probably decline about 17% over the forecast period, and that is they have actually had unusually high pension COLAs in recent years because they're connected to active duty pay. But mortality is a factor here with the median age in the 80s, and so essentially there are enough savings from deaths that they're offsetting those higher pension COLAs in the FPDR 1 category. So the way we do the pension budget, it's the biggest and most important, is essentially we apply a whole lot of actuarial assumptions to everybody in our population. Most of those assumptions come out of the 2013 experience study, which we plan to update in 2019. So we apply retirement rates and mortality probabilities and withdrawal rates, all the things that you would normally do in a pension plan to try to project those over the 5 years. There are 2 exceptions to that approach. The first, and they're basically to mitigate risk around the 27 pay dates. The first thing we do is we add some cushion retirements. So we throw the actuarial assumptions, come up with retirement projections, which are just one piece, but the most uncertain piece. And then we usually add at least 5 cushion retirements. We have added 20 this year because we are real uncertain about 27 pay dates. There will be 2 in fiscal year 18-19, but they're back-to-back, one in February and one in March. But that makes the window a little bigger. And the Portland Firefighters Association contract was not settled during the last 27 pay date window. It's possible folks were waiting for that to settle and get their higher pay and get that in their look back. So we are thinking that it may be a banner year for retirements. And we not having enough money to pay retirements is a real bad thing. So we threw some extra cushions in. The other thing we've done is assumed that everybody who retires has 27 pay dates in their calculation. There will be some who don't. The non-represented don't even qualify for them. But again, to be conservative, we assumed that everybody would grab that. So those are some pieces of conservatism in that budget. And if you're interested in the actuarial assumptions, as I know some of you might be, they're at the end of the document, the most important ones, but we can give you as much detail as you would like.
And is the experience study that you referred something that Milliman does?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. So Milliman will do that and just look at the actual experience of the plan over a much longer period to give us good assumptions to work with. Right. So speaking of retirements, it's always, I think we show you this slide maybe twice a year, but it's so interesting to look at. These are the retirements, actual retirements for the last 13 years in the solid purple line. And then the striped lines are what we are projecting, sort of, in the current year, in fiscal year 17-18. You'll see that number in the current fiscal year is real high because that's where our cushion retirements are. We always budget them in the current year, so we get 12 months of pension expenses of cushion in the budget year. And then you'll see in the next, in the budget year, fiscal year 18-19, our forecast, and then the forecast going out for the last 4 years of the forecast period. So you can see how variable it is. I mean, it ranges from, we had 105 back in 2006, 2007, but there were only 20 in 2009, 2010. So the most volatile piece of this budget is new retirements. It's much easier to predict death rates and pension COLAs and things like that. This piece is hard to predict, and it's impacted by all kinds of things outside of our control. I mean, it's predicted, or it's impacted by labor, contract provisions, by bureau management, by the secondary employment market, since a lot of retirees are young and do go on and find another job, by the stock market, if folks feel like they have enough money in their deferred comp. We see all kinds of factors sort of anecdotally coming into this, but I don't know, even after we consider all those things, I don't know if we're any better at predicting it than just applying actuarial assumptions, but we do try to use our human judgment a little bit on this piece.
Can I ask you just,
Yeah.
it's probably, if you go back to that.
Yeah.
When you're saying fiscal year, this makes sense to everybody else, but when you say 04, is that 04, 05, or 03, or 04?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's 03, 04. So the E at the end means fiscal year end 04, so the fiscal year that ends in 04.
Okay.
I think we actually just ran out of room on that chart to print all the pieces of it. Sorry to make it confusing.
And I have one quick question. I see later in here you've got the expected number of retirements that this correlates to. Mm-hmm. But roughly how many, just very ballpark, active Tier 2 police and fire members are there, would you say? Are there?
Boy, I'm sure I have that number at home, at the office.
And I'm sure it's in it's in the actuarial evaluation things. I just couldn't recall.
I should be able to tell you that. I would guess that it's about 1,100. I want to say 700-ish at police and 400, but that might just be officers at police. I think it's higher than that. I think 700 is just the officers.
Okay.
So over 1,000 and under 1,500 would be my ballpark. I really should know that off the top of my head.
It just helps put the number of retirements themselves in perspective.
Yeah, as a percent of the workforce. That would be another great way to look at it. I don't know if we could get that number on actuals going back, but it'd be a nice way to start looking at it going forward is what % of the workforce is turning over every year. And I don't know either how much the workforce has grown over that time period. So that would sure be a nice piece of data for us to start looking at. Any other questions on retirements or FPDR 1 and 2 pension benefits? All right. So moving on to FPDR 3, pension contributions, PERS contributions. This is the second biggest chunk of our budget, but it's still under 10%, but it is growing the fastest, which is exactly what you would expect. In addition to just growing in sheer numbers, every time we hire a new police officer or firefighter, we have one more FPDR 3 member that we make PERS contributions on. We are just now starting to see them spreading through the ranks and having higher pay that way. So there's only a handful that have been promoted to that level above police officer or firefighter at this point. Actually, our fire liaison is one of that handful of folks. But that will change, and pretty soon they'll spread, you know, eventually they'll be all of both bureaus and be at all ranks. So that's also impacting pay and therefore PERS contributions. We've already talked about the PERS contribution rate increases and the other wage increases that are also playing into growth in this number. About 40% of the sworn workforce is FPDR 3 right now. And that's why I know I have these numbers sitting on my desk, because we can tell you the percentage that each are, so we know the numbers. But by the end of the 5-year forecast period, we expect it to be almost 2/3, about 60%. So it's happening more and more quickly. I do just want to point out that as this becomes a larger share of our budget, we just become more vulnerable to the growth in PERS contribution rates. It's sort of dabbling around the edges now, but at some point this will be a bigger share of our budget than anything else. And so that means those changes in PERS contribution rates hit us harder and harder. And we already talked about the bumpiness in them. And when you're trying to manage a tax rate, as this becomes a bigger share of the budget, we might want to look at smoothing techniques so that we don't have spikes in the tax rate. On the other hand, the board may be comfortable with spikes in the, every other year spikes in the tax rate, but we may start to see that impact eventually. We're not there yet. Disability and death benefits. They are less than 5% of our budget, although they are the most important piece, obviously, to active. I mean, active employees care about their pension too, but I would say that this is more of a focus for the active population is disability benefits, and they get a lot of programmatic attention. So the chart on the right shows you all the different kinds of disability and death benefits. At the largest component is medical payments, which is the blue X line going across the top. We just have that growing by medical inflation. It's, of course, pretty volatile. It just depends on the nature and the severity and the number of service and occupational claims we have at any given moment. Underneath that are the two lines that are kind of converging in the middle there, the triangle, yellow triangle line. Is my mic working? Yes. And the square maroon line are short-term disability payments and long-term disability payments. So these are wage replacement benefits that we pay folks when they miss work. And those two lines are converging, which is kind of interesting. Long-term disability used to be much higher, but it has been dropping steadily for years. I think we may be potentially, we're seeing a bottoming out of that decline. It can't decline endlessly, obviously. And in fact, we have both categories creeping up a little bit next year. Long-term disability, because we have identified a few folks that may move from short-term disability to long-term disability next year. Short-term disability, it's more a matter of it's been unusually low for the last couple of years, and we budget it at kind of a historic average, but it varies a lot from year to year, as you would expect. Wage increases are also a factor there as well, because it is a wage replacement benefit. And then running along the bottom, we see return to work subsidies, which are only about $500,000. This is when we pay the bureaus. Is the mic echoing for you guys?
No.
No, okay. I want to make sure it's not echoing around in the room. It's kind of echoing here. Is when we pay the bureaus 75% of a disabled member's wages if they can put that person to work in a modified duty assignment. And it's a small cost, $500,000, but I do want to say that at the Police Bureau, it has only been about $250,000 for the last several years, and then in 16-17 it went up to $350,000, and it looks like it's on track to do that again this year. So that's a big change in how many folks the Police Bureau has been able to bring back into those modified duty assignments. That's a nice expense to have, because we know that they're more likely to be able to return to work in their sworn positions if they can get back to work in a modified duty position. And then at the very bottom are funeral benefits, which change because the FPDR 2 funeral benefit is more generous than the FPDR 1 funeral benefit. So eventually that cost will start to go up as well, but we aren't seeing much of that yet this year. Any questions about disability benefits? All right, last cost is administrative costs. So our goal with administrative costs is to stay under 3% of the total spending, and we have been mostly under 2%, so we are hitting that goal. We expect about $3.7 million in administrative costs for next year. The four pieces of that are personnel, materials and services, which we break into two categories: external, that we buy from outside vendors, and internal, that we buy from other city parties. And then capital. Capital is just enhancements to the database that we use to pay everybody and track everybody, since that's an intangible capital asset. Personnel grows with cost of living adjustments, merit raises for some folks, health benefit, inflation. We do have 4 represented employees who will get a 1.65% above and beyond COLA wage increase any day now as well. External M&S, our biggest external materials and services cost is space rent, which is about $217,000 a year. And it is going up quite a lot next year, but that's just a quirky thing. We got 1 month free on our rent this year, and we negotiated that as part of our lease extension. So next year we have to pay 12 months of lease, so that drives that up. Also, actuarial expenses are also bumpy. There's just too much bumpiness because we do biannual valuations and levy adequacy analyses, so we'll have a biannual valuation next year, so that budget increases for next year. Internal materials and services, the biggest charge is the city attorney's office, so we can all try to persuade Franco to take a pay cut, and he'll be this cost will go down. But barring that, internal M&S is actually declining a little bit this year because the data center move is done now, and all the city bureaus had to help pay for that, and we're done paying for that. And there have actually, I have to say, been quite a few small but significant cost decreases across the internal service bureaus, at least for us. I don't know how they look in other bureaus, and that kind of reverses the usual trend of those always going up. I don't know if we're seeing that everywhere in the city, but we have experienced that. And then capital, which is a very small piece of the budget, but will drop a lot next year because we are having a big programming push to automate several things this year, and we expect that work to be done by the time we get to next year.
Can I ask you on the, so at the beginning, the goal to keep the budget under, or keep the administrative costs under 3% of budget, is that total budget of the fund?
Net of tax anticipation notes. So yes, it gets easier as the budget grows, right, to stay under 3%.
So I'm just curious why you would tie it to the budget of the, because you got PERS rates, you have police and fire getting raises. There's a lot of things that drive that budget. I don't understand why your budget would be tied to that. Maybe it makes sense. I'm not a budget person, but I'm just trying to figure out why our goal would be tied to the total budget that has a lot of different moving parts.
My guess is, well, so that standards existed for a long time, and maybe we should reevaluate it. My guess is that this is common. This is the typical way that administrative costs are measured in any plan. They'll say, we are serving this, with this disability plan or this pension plan, the administrative cost is X% of total spendings. It's a pretty common standard across that industry. So my guess is that that's where that goal came from. I will say that in our case, with a fund that is growing a lot, and to some degree administrative expenses are going to grow, the more PERS members and the more people we have to pay, maybe we have to add a person over time or something. But as this grows and grows and grows, it may not be a standard that makes as much sense.
Yeah, I'd like to, it might not be enough. I'm trying to think, if you usually have a goal that's based on something other than just I don't understand why it would be 3% of the budget of the fund.
Yeah, and it is just a standard from that industry.
It's a standard way to look at the administrative costs of running something, and you take your entire budget and look at what you're paying for overhead to manage whatever program you're running. So it's not an out-of-the-ordinary measure. It's not an out-of-the-ordinary measure. Mm-hmm. And if you, I mean, in the nonprofit world, if you looked at the end of the year with solicitations from a lot of nonprofits looking for charitable donations before the end of the calendar year, a lot of them will highlight our administrative costs are less than 15% of running our entire program. It's a measure of efficiency. How efficiently can you run your program with the administrative overhead that you need to run it? So it's a typical benchmark.
Okay.
And I think it's easy for people to sort of dollarize it too. You can say, well, taxpayer, I put $100 in to fund fire and police pensions, and you took $3 of those dollars, or this year $1.63 of that, and spent it on staff and building space and all those things. But the rest of my tax dollars went, using the nonprofit analogy. But I'm certainly open to, another way to think about it is how much it grows from year to year. We can't control some of these costs, especially with 60% being personnel and kind of tied to city compensation practices, which are not something that any of us can control. But you can help control staffing levels. And so you can say, okay, well, we're growing 4.7% from what we expect to spend this year to what we're going to spend next year. And think about the cost of living adjustments that are happening in personnel with the 3.6% COLA. Actually, this number has 3.8 in it. Health benefit inflation, merit raises, the additional 1.65 for the represented employees, and the growth in rent and actuarial services, and kind of mentally think, does that seem reasonable? But if you also want to look at a line item detail with every single thing in the administrative budget, that is on page 17 of that bigger forecast document. And I believe we have it listed so you can see spending in the prior year, budget this year, and budget next year. I have to look and see.
I think you've raised a good point. I don't think on its own, a basis like 3% justifies the administrative expense. I think it's a fine point. But in the end, there has to be a way to convert what you anticipate these things to be. Certainly, as you've itemized the reasons why costs have changed, we need to be comfortable with those from an administrative level. But aside from that, you need to take these administrative costs and be able to project them in all your forecasts. And the easiest way to do that is a percentage of the overall expenses. So you have to just translate the dollars into some percentage in order to project it.
It is a forecasting tool as well, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
But please take a look at, this is the most discretionary part of our budget. As we talked about, the benefits that are defined in charter are, for the most part, the Fpdr 2 pension COLA being a notable exception, are for the most part, they are what they are. This is the one piece that at least has some discretionary components. So I invite you to take a look at that line item detail. Call me with any questions or concerns if they come up later after the board meeting.
Is there any place in the back that lists the FTEs?
No, we don't have that. I could rattle them off for you, but that's another thing that we could add.
Metric.
We do have 17 personnel. They range from an office support specialist 2 up to SAM. So that's pretty much the whole spectrum within the city compensation plan. And we have 17 employees, 6 on the disability side of the operation, or 7 on the disability side, 7 on the pension program and finance side, and then 3 more, Sam and 2 other our legal person and our IT person, to give you a sense of kind of how the staff are spread out. But yeah, it would be a good idea to add a position table to the document as well. Yeah.
Yeah, or even just adding another line to this administrative cost
with an FTE count
that just shows FTE, which would, interestingly, as the plan is growing, the FTE count presumably is pretty flat.
Right. And that is why, myself, when I think about this measure, I think, well, it's easier and easier to stay under 3% of total spending when your spending is going up so much every year.
Right.
So I myself don't think this is a perfect measure. And there is some truth to the fact that administrative expenses may have to, but they don't need to grow in the same proportion as the fund is growing. So that's why I do agree that it's a valid point, that it is certainly not the only way we should look at administrative expenses. Would the board be interested in seeing the detail of staff, like what the different classifications are or anything like that? Okay. But we will add that table with FTE, or the line with FTE, to future budgets. So that is it for expenses. Any other questions on expenses? All right, let's talk about revenue. So much more fun. Property taxes. As we talked about, property taxes are 98% of our resources when you consider that beginning fund balance is basically unspent tax receipts from prior years. So since they fund almost everything we do, they really just grow in step with the fund. You know, fund increases go up 7%, tax revenues usually go up 7%. This year is a little different. Taxes are only going up 5.5%. Which is less than the 7% growth that we're seeing in total expenses, and that is because we have a higher beginning fund balance next year than we were expecting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But here, I wanted to pause on this slide and talk about the impact on taxpayers. We spend so much time talking about the RMV rate because we're concerned about that 280 cap, but property owners actually pay taxes based on AV, on assessed value. So I wanted to give you a sense that if you owned a home at the median AV in the city of Portland, your tax bill is going to go up about $28 for next year, and it's going to go up about $165 over the entire 5-year forecast period. And so that's moving from about $401 this year to $566 at the end of the forecast period. And now back to our focus on RMV tax rate. We do talk about this slide in the state of Fpdr as well, but I like to put it back up in a budget context. There's a lot going on this slide, so let me orient Trustee Fouts. This is the actual and the projected RMV tax rate. The red line across the top that's our 280 cap. That's the line we're trying to stay under. Yeah.
It looks like it's below 275.
Yeah.
It does. Yes. Well, there's some sort of visual problem there, isn't it? All right.
It's supposed to represent 280.
So mentally shift that red line up a little bit and feel better that we are even further under that line. I'm not quite sure what happened with that line. The blue line with I guess it's diamonds on it, is the actual spending for the actual rate for the last 5 years. So you can see the drop that I was talking about before. And then the line going forward from 1819, the red line is the city economist forecast for the 5 years of the forecast period. And then the 2 lines beyond that come from our tax levy adequacy analysis. The darker blue dots are what Milliman projects at the 50th percentile, so essentially at the median probability for the 14 years after the forecast period. And the green triangle line is what they would project at the 5th percentile, which is kind of the worst case scenario over the next 14 years. So you can see that the rate is dropping and is predicted to drop again next year. And then it's predicted to sort of start creeping up. And that's partly because, mostly that's because we expect RMV growth to slow down at that point, or the city economist expects RMV growth to slow down at that point. Of course, we've been expecting that for a couple of years, so who knows if that will actually happen. And we do have higher expenses creeping into the forecast in those out years with the PERS contribution rates going up. But it is comforting to note that at no point in the forecast, at the median probability, do we expect to be higher than we already have been. And those 2 last lines that are based on the most recent levy adequacy analysis don't even include the RMV growth from the last year. So that is a comforting thing about this slide. So all of that means that there's a diminishing possibility that we're going to hit that 280 cap at any point, even in our peak expense years. And it also means that we are causing less compression under the Measure 50 compression laws on the city's general fund and on other general government levies. Compression happens because the state of Oregon has a constitutional cap on property taxes. They can't exceed, the general government levies can't exceed $10 per $1,000 of RMV. So if on an individual property they're going to be more than that, local option levies get compressed first, and then permanent levies like ours after that. So we're also causing less compression for everybody else, and they're causing less compression for us, which is a nice thing.
Stacy?
Yes.
The forecast in the dark blue lines, well, in any of those, is that before the recent changes in the projected PERS contribution levels?
Yes, it is also before the change. Yes, good point. It's before the last year's 13.8% RMV growth, but it is also before increases in PERS contribution rates. Yes.
Okay, so there's some offsetting. Yes, obviously.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see the next analysis and see, which they'll start working on in a couple of months, to see what kind of offset. Yeah. And yeah, it'll be interesting to look at.
Thanks.
So other revenue besides property taxes, all put together, this is only 2% of our total revenue. So we're not talking about big money, but there are some interesting components. Interagency revenue, we talked about what that is, the money coming in from the police and fire contracts. The most notable thing to say here is that we do have it dropping about 10% next year after we have lots of conversations with the police and fire fiscal staff at this time of year, trying to get all these pieces right with our respective budgets. And there's some concern at the Police Bureau that they still have really pretty dramatic staffing shortages. We have about 100 officers in the training pipeline right now, but it's a long pipeline. So we decided that it's possible that they will not have as much staff to do that take on those secondary employment contracts. Some of them they're obligated to do, but some of them are piecemeal. And so we knocked that down for next year, and then we do expect it to recover in 1920, and then it will grow essentially with the PERS contribution rate, which is the proxy pension overhead rate and wages. The reserve fund transfer, we haven't needed this in the last 5 years. This is probably a good time for me to mention that we have a reserve fund. The Fpdr reserve fund is a separate fund. It's also established by city charter. It was created in 1948, which I think explains why it is only $750,000. Doesn't do us a lot of good in terms of money. I mean, I would love to have a reserve fund of $750,000, but it doesn't do our $200 million fund much good. We do always budget to transfer that reserve in case we need it, in case our TAN issue was not enough cash flow wise. It gives us a secondary resource to tap. So we always budget it, but we haven't needed it for the last 5 years. Interest income is interesting. It is growing a whole lot over the forecast period for 2 reasons. First is interest rates are going up. We expect that we're going to have an average of about 1.24% earnings in the city treasury pool this fiscal year. And then next year, city treasury forecast that goes up to 1.65% and then up to 2% after that. And that's even with the disinvesting in corporate securities that we talked about quite a bit last summer. In addition to the growing interest rates, as our fund gets bigger, we sit on more and more fund balance. So our average daily fund balance this year was 61 million. Next year, we have that creeping up to 64.7 million. And then in the final year, the forecast, it's up at 84.2 million. So as our fund grows, we'll have more money to earn interest. And then in addition to that, interest rates are growing. And thinking about interest rates and the spread between that and the tax anticipation note issue, which we've talked about quite a bit, I'll just update you all and say the spread right now in the current year, it's been about 1/3%, 0.35%. So we've been earning in the 1.2-ish range on the city treasury pool, and our TANs were issued at 0.91%. So the spread is still positive. We project it to be positive throughout the forecast period, about 0.2%, so by a pretty small margin. And the spread has got to make up for debt issuance costs, which are minimal, and staff time to issue TANs and all that stuff for it to continue to be a financially advantageous thing to do. But we'll keep an eye on it. We may be required to do it because there are legal questions about whether or not we could build up enough fund balance if we chose to go that path instead. But quick update on that issue. We are tracking it really closely. And the other two pieces are subrogation revenue and interim recovery, very, very small pieces. We have had an unusually large amount of subrogation revenue this year and last year, and I think that's mostly connected to the natural gas explosion that happened a while ago. All right, fund balance and contingency. So this chart shows beginning fund balance in the yellow bar and contingency in the red bar, both where they actually were last year, where we project they'll be this year, and then for the budget and 4 years of the forecast. You can see that pretty big drop in beginning fund balance from last year in 16-17 to this year in 17-18. We talked a little bit about that last year. That's a consequence of a whole lot of things happening in 16-17. We settled the Miller lawsuit, 27 pay dates came back, 3% pay increases came in. A whole lot of unexpected things happened, and we knew fund balance would drop, and it did. You'll notice that it recovers in 18-19. We designed this year's budget to restore that so that when we got to ending fund balance this year, we'd be back to where we should be. So you see that reflected in next year's beginning fund balance, fiscal year end 19. And in fact, we actually overshot the mark by a little bit. We think we're going to wind up at 12.2 million in fund balance to start with next year instead of the 9.8 million that we were aiming for. We've had about 2 million less in expenses this year. This is where we think we will wind up. We budgeted for 50 retirements in September 2017, which was the first 27 paid, sort of the first clean 27 pay date window after they came back, and we only had 30. So that was a lot fewer pension expenses than we were counting on, and then short-term disability benefits have just been running a lot lower than usual this year as well. So when we put those two together, I think we're going to wind up with about 2 million in underspending. We do also expect to undercollect on property taxes a little bit. Compression has been worse than the city economists predicted it would be, but we still think we're going to wind up with more fund balance than intended, so to speak. The proper level of contingency is always a really interesting and important question. We have settled, and here again we talk about percents, we have settled on 7% of total fund spending as a good contingency level in a low-risk time, and that turns out to be about 10.8 million for next year. There are multiple ways to think about contingency. I mean, first you have to think about what you might need contingency for. We need contingency for unexpected one-time events. We don't need contingency for cash flow management. We use TAMs for that. So we're primarily thinking about, well, what are the odds that there is a mid-year benefit increase that we didn't see coming, as in the case of the police wage increases? What are the odds that way more people retire than we predicted would retire? What are the odds that we have a very expensive lawsuit that we don't know about right now that settles quickly? Things of that nature, and we want to make sure that we are sitting on enough money and contingency to cover those. Contingency has been as high as 10% of fund spending in the past when we've had lots of outstanding legal risks or lots of unknowns around open labor contracts. But it is a relatively low risk, especially for next year environment right now. We don't have any labor contracts that will be coming open next year. We will, I believe the fire contract expires again on June 30, 2019, so that will be coming open soon. We don't have any outstanding litigation that would have significant financial consequences if it didn't go our way. So we have settled on 7% as a reasonable number. But of course, we can notch that up or down if the board prefers. So last, let me just talk about risks to the forecast, because I get up here and I tell you all these numbers like we really know what's going to happen. And I love having a job where we know we're going to be wrong, and we're just trying not to be super, super wrong. These are some categories where if things went one way or another, we could be significantly wrong. And the risks to the forecast are not as big as they have been in the past. Like I said, this is a relatively low risk year. Really the only risk that I can see right now in the short term is police hiring, and retirements, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for 18-19, we have assumed that police is going to hire about 74 additional people between now and June 30, 2019. That's a lot of people. They only have 35 vacancies right now, so that level of hiring depends on council authorizing them to overfill their positions, which they have requested before, been denied. They're requesting again right now. So we have assumed that they are gonna get that authorization. If they don't get that authorization, then PERS contributions will be less than we've budgeted. If they get more authorization than we expect, like they're allowed to overfill more than, say, 40 positions, then PERS contributions could be higher if they can fill higher at that rate. Historically, the police bureau's only hired and retained about 27 officers a year, but they hired and retained 54 last year, and they've done 56 so far this fiscal year with several months to go. So really high levels of hiring, if council authorizes it, might be possible. And when that happens, you are essentially accelerating our transition phase. And in an overfill situation, we're pushing off. We know those retirements will come, but there hasn't been a one-to-one correlation. So it's not nobody's retired to have to fill that spot. So it's not as expensive as a retirement, but we still have those PERS contributions. So that is the biggest short-term risk that I see is related to police hiring. The other two are more uncertainties in the out years of the forecast, the uncertainty around the PERS rates that we've already talked about a lot. I'm more nervous about the rates in the last 2 years of the forecast, so we're several years out at that point. We've forecast 35%, which seems pretty high, but if they were 36% instead, that would add about $2 million to costs over those 2 years. If they were 38% instead, that would add about $6 million in costs to those out years. So that's another significant area of uncertainty. And then finally, there are, I guess what I would call risks and baseline assumptions, primarily in wage increases and retirement rates. Uncertainty in wage increases comes in two forms. The first is in uncertainty about inflation. Right now, the city economist has predicted this sort of spike in the CPIW that will have this 1 year over 3%, and then he has it going back down to under 3%. If it turns into a higher inflationary period rather than a 1 year spike, that obviously increases costs. It might be worth mentioning that we are also switching away from that CPIW measure to another measure because that measure will no longer be published for our MSA, but I don't see a lot of, the measure that they have selected is over a long period of time been almost identical to the CPIW, so I don't see that as causing any really big unknowns, but it.
When is it?
I believe it's this, Jennifer would know for sure, but the CPI for the western areas.
Yeah.
Right. CPIW for western areas, correct. Then the other form of uncertainty in wages is wage increases beyond COLA, which do happen pretty regularly. In fact, all three of the current sworn contracts had wage increases above and beyond COLA. So if we see more of those as contracts again come up for renewal, then we're looking at bigger cost increases in those years as well. And then last is just the higher, is retirement rates. If people retire more quickly than we're predicting, then, as I said, that accelerates that transition, gets us to that peak moment faster and faster if retirement rates are higher than we have been thinking. Those are the main forms of uncertainty on the forecast right now. Questions?
I was going to ask, if people retire early, they're retiring at a lower benefit. If they stay longer, they get a higher benefit. So why would that?
Well, because
does it wash at the end?
Well, it depends. It just accelerates the time. It just brings on that extra year of double expense sooner. So it accelerates the time. It moves it back. So say we were going to peak in the 2030s. I don't know that we peak any higher than we would have otherwise, but we peak sooner. So the costs occur earlier in the forecast, or well, they'd still be outside the forecast, but earlier in time. It is an interesting question when you talk about what's more expensive to the fund. I mean, it gets complicated by pensions do increase as people work longer, so we'll pay them out, but we'll pay them out for less time because they will be in retirement, assuming they have average longevity, they'll be in retirement for less time. And at the Fire Bureau, particularly where we have a lot of folks who work all the way to the 30 years of service, the more they wait, their pensions don't grow as much as by waiting as we see on the police side, where folks typically retire with less years, because we stop counting years of service at 30. So the delayed retirements on fire are not increasing costs as much as delayed retirements in police would. But it is an interesting dynamic. And I don't know the answer, actually. Yeah.
Me neither.
I have 2 questions. One of them, the reserve fund at $750,000. Is that something we need to address? I mean, is this fund set up for something specific that we're not foreseeing? I mean, do we have a responsibility to fund it to $5 million for budgetary costs? I mean, is that something that we're responsible for?
I think it's a great question. I think my honest answer is I just think that fund is totally unnecessary, because we manage all of our risks by having contingency within our operating fund. And I don't know why that reserve fund was set up in 1948, but we really manage our risks with contingency. And so that reserve fund, it's just there in charter.
Are we required to maintain that reserve fund?
Yes. Right now, because it's in the city charter, and then we're required to maintain it at exactly the $750,000. We have to start the year and end the year with exactly $750,000 in there. The interest on the fund, we do have that booked directly to our fund, our operating fund, so we don't have unnecessary transactions going on. But so it would require, I guess no one ever bothered to want to change the charter.
Change voted by the city council could change that, or was it deeper than that?
No, city council can't change this.
Okay. It would have to be a voter approved, yes.
Okay. Sorry. So then how can we benefit this, or is it just best left alone?
I don't think it does any harm.
Can we make it work for us in a better way, such as rainy day fund sort of thing? It's good, the economy's good now, right? Is it going to be as great in 10 years? I don't know. I mean, is it something that we can use now where we have a higher or better economy, higher growth? I don't want to take money away, but is this something we should be utilizing as a rainy day fund of some form?
Part of it, let's go back to you. We, by the charter, cannot carry a balance from year to year. We do it in the sense that we carry a contingency from year to year, but we are not allowed to accrue a fund off the side. So we can't, even if we had this fund, it can't be more than $750,000.
Oh, so they have a cap on it?
Yes. Yeah, well, we have a cap on our total. Our technically is we should end the year with zero money available. Okay. That's the theory about fund. We do contingency. That is a standard business practice and smart practice to have a contingency, and nobody has challenged that. But we cannot build up a fund where we've got 10 million this year, another 10 million, so 20, 30, 40, 50. We cannot do that. That's where pay as you go. So theoretically, we go to zero. The interesting thing is I was looking at some very old charters. This started out as at $500,000 in 1948. In 1960s, I don't remember which year, it went to 750. They were actually paying benefits out of that fund. I think the disability benefits were being paid out of the fund. It was designed to run a certain way early, and then all of a sudden, as the fund got so big, we started managing the fund in the way that we are managing and operating our cash today, and it became sort of a meaningless side account that we just maintain because we're required to maintain. I don't think $750,000 doesn't do anything. We carry contingency of 7%, which covers, I think, part of the reason why that was created. I think they're a little bit more true to trying to keep the fund down to zero carryover. So I think it's archaic, and I don't think we really need it. We can't use it for anything except for a loan of $750, and that's not much money when you start talking about the size of our fund with it. So I think it's just an old thing that just over time has been sort of shoved off the side as important and not used as originally intended.
Okay.
When you think, go ahead. I was going to say, when you think of you figure out your 7% contingency, are you keeping in the back of your mind you have that $750,000 also?
No.
So if you didn't have it, you would still keep the exact same contingency?
Yeah, it's so little money that it really doesn't impact anything we do. We don't mentally think about it when we issue TANs. We don't mentally think about it when we issue when we set contingency. It really is so little money that it just doesn't play into any. We could consider it and knock down contingency by $750,000. But we sort of think of it as extra contingency. And there have been times when the TAN issue has not been large enough, or we've had a big unanticipated expense in those first 4.5 months before we got property tax revenues, when we have tapped that $750,000. If it did not exist, we would run out of money, I guess, in those years. But what we would actually do is get an interfund loan from another city bureau, like the sewer agency or somebody else who sits on a lot of cash, and we would pay them interest on that loan. So it does serve that purpose as sort of a double contingency. It is unusual that we have to tap it. It doesn't hurt anything, and it doesn't help anything from my perspective, honestly. And I just think nobody has really wanted to bother to change the charter.
This is what I would like to see with that is in today's dollars, it's nothing. I understand that, right? I would like to see that money either work for us. I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to all money that we're responsible for. I'd like to see that money either work for us or go away. I mean, or bring it into the budget totally, because to me, a double, right? Now we're, okay, hey, not only are we managing the fund, we're managing our backup. Oh, and then we also have this extra backup that really we don't do anything with, it just sits there.
Well, it does earn interest. I don't want to leave you with the impression that it's not doing anything. It does the same thing that our fund balance does. It's sitting in the city treasury pool, and it is earning interest. So it's not quite as bad as cash under the mattress. Right. It is earning interest.
I'm just curious if we can take, if you could explore options to somehow, if we got $750,000 introduced into the fund by change of charter, I know that's a several step process. If we were to get $750,000 introduced into the fund, could it work better for us in X? And that's something I'd like you to maybe think about.
We wouldn't do anything different with the money because we can't invest it any differently than it's already invested. The only thing I can think of that it could do is in a high expense year, it could knock the property tax levy down by $750,000. I'm not sure how worthwhile that is on $150 million property tax levy, but it could be used as a one-time sort of cash out in a high expense year to try to mitigate a tax levy increase, but again, I'm not sure it's enough money to really accomplish that. And it couldn't do anything for us that it's not doing now if it were in our own fund. Okay. It would just be invested in the exact same way.
I have a question. You mentioned that you have accessed these funds in the past. When was the last fiscal year when the funds were needed?
I believe it was fiscal year 12-13 was the last. So it's not in ancient times.
$750,000?
Yeah, and we've tended to just transfer the whole thing or nothing. Again, it's so little money, it's kind of like, to put it in our terms, like, you're like, do I need $5 or do I need $10? I'll just take the $10. So when we have gotten that low, we've just pulled the whole thing over. And I don't know how often it happened before that. I do know 12-13 was the last year that it did happen, that we grabbed that money. Fiscal year 2012-13, and I don't know what happened. I'm trying to remember, because I was not in this role, but I was working at Fpdr, and I cannot remember what happened. We do have other little cash flow tricks that we can employ. We can ask police and fire to not bill us, to wait till we get our property taxes. They are willing to wait to bill us until November 30th instead of billing us on, September 30th if they need to help us out in that respect. We have a lot of tools in the cash flow management arsenal. We don't really need this, but it is another tool, another small tool.
Does that fund have to, if you use something out of it, does it have to be budgeted in the next year as a replacement, or how do you deal with that?
Yep, we have to send it back by June 30. So we have to start the year and end the year with the $750,000 there. Yeah, so we always budget to transfer it into the operating fund, and then we always budget to transfer it back, because if we did transfer it in, we would have to transfer it back.
I think of it, like you said, as a final backstop.
Yeah.
There are other resources that other bureaus in the city have available that you do not. And so it's there should something unexpected come up. And the whole emphasis is on unexpected.
Right. It is sort of the double backstop. Yes.
And one thing we talked about was a 7% contingency. We spent some time, because it was higher, we can, if we anticipate next year having some issues that we see potentially coming down to cost us more, we can make a decision to increase our contingency in a budget. And that's going to get you millions of dollars extra versus $750,000. So if we can at least try to anticipate, we know there's, let's say, that lawsuit coming in, well, if it's likely to be sold next year, we will try to put some of the money into the contingency to cover that. And that, so managing the contingency is better than trying to trust the 750, because 750,000 is so small, it doesn't help a whole lot.
And the effort required to get to it, with having to go to the voters to change the charter, is a big lift.
Right. It's one of those things that, you know, might want to consider in the context of other charter changes that were happening at the same time, rather than on its own.
Well, my thought on it is that if there was a positive way that the money could work better for us, there wouldn't be any money spent on trying to sell it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We keep it where it is. The voters vote it down, fine. We're wherever we're at. I have a second question on small money, I guess you could consider it that way. You talked about resources and benefits paid to the fund through third party. I think we're probably all well aware that not all third parties pay their bills. So I'm curious, one, do we have a number roughly of what is owed to us that you just aren't seeing payment on?
We don't have that number, but I know the police bureau could calculate that number, because they know how much they, and so what Trustee Hunziker is referring to is when the police bureau does, and there's quite a lot of this at the police bureau, when they do contract work for third parties and don't get paid, either because the city has agreed to do it for free, that happens for some events, or because they just don't pay the bill, as happens with political campaigns. No, I'm actually
referring to like collections, third-party collections on like maybe vehicle crashes.
Oh, on subrogation. Oh, I'm sorry.
The larger numbers, because that stuff is pretty small in numbers.
Well, the subrogation revenue is actually much smaller than the interagency revenue from the secondary employment, we call it. So it's actually subrogation. In a normal year is in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. It has hit 100,000 last year, and we think it'll hit 100,000 this year.
I saw the 1.65 million, and I thought we were getting closer to that number. If we're in the $50,000 mark on outstanding bills, I disregard.
Yeah, that most of that other number is the interagency revenue coming from police. So I actually think it's an interesting question. You think about the work that the police bureau does that they don't get paid for, and therefore we don't get paid for because there's no overhead rate for them to pass on to us. You kind of stumbled into an interesting question. But I know that is a political issue at police as well as
a community effort as well, because a lot of those are community events where police go, the city pays us to be there, and it benefits the city. So there's a benefit back to the city of members. So
there is quite a lot of that at police that then we don't get anything on, but neither does the police bureau. So we're all sort of donating that in that sense. Are there other questions on the budget?
I had one observation about the material in the back. On page 6 of the forecast, there's a discussion about PERS, and the sentence, the second paragraph on the page, the sentence that starts, if anything, actual rates may be less than forecast because of robust 2017 stock market performance. The UAL, the actuarial liability, is so big at PERS that even the robust experience in 2017 is not going to move the dial for the rates. The rates are collared, and we have so much to make up in terms of the UAL and in terms of the collared rates that we've had historically that we need more years like that, but they're not going to move the dial on the rates. So that, you may want to change that sentence a little bit.
I actually ran that whole paragraph by Milliman, but I have to say they were talking about hoping that they had robust enough to uncollar, but I don't know if they mean specifically to uncollar the city of Portland. They may mean to uncollar all other jurisdictions. So, okay, yes, I will revise that part to reflect that we. Most of when they release those advisory rates for the next 2 years, those numbers, they know a lot about what's going into those numbers, so we have a little less uncertainty there. The advisory rates are based on the December 31, 2016 value of assets and the update to 2017. But Chair Cooperman saying, the UAL is so enormous that even with 20% stock market growth, it's not going to move that.
When you say, excuse me, when you say uncollar, Are you talking about differences between the actuarial smooth value and market value, that some quarter?
I'm talking about the amount by which the PERS rates are allowed to move each year in order to smooth the rates that employers pay.
Okay.
We have collars on the rates to manage that.
On the contribution rates
On the
themselves.
contribution rates.
And when the UAL reaches a certain level, the collars can come off.
Got it.
And
So it's not on the asset value relative to market,
No.
it's really relative to the contribution?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? See, we read the material.
You
And we-
did. It was a
print.
great discussion. Sorry that you have to listen to me drone on and on and on again. But great questions. And if you think of other questions that you, please don't hesitate to call, look in more detail. Are there any changes to this budget other than the ones we've already, I will add an FTE count to that chart, make the change on the PERS contribution rates. Are there other changes that the board would like to see, either in substance or numbers?
You could move up that red line on the.
Yes, yes. Well, actually, that part, yes, and actually, is it there in the forecast document as well that we actually turn into council? Yeah, that's no good.
No, it's better in the forecast.
Is it better in the forecast?
Page 26.
Something must have happened when yeah, it looks right in the forecast document. Something must have happened in the transition to the PowerPoint slide.
26.
I actually, my staff set up this to make these charts, like they have them flow out of all of our Excel workbooks. Everything auto updates, which is awesome. But it does mean maybe that we don't look as intently as we should at each version as it flows through the Word document and into the PowerPoint. Yes, so we will make those changes. Thank you. Any other changes the board wants to see?
If there are no other changes, we need to pass a motion to adopt the recommended budget as the FPDR requested budget that will be submitted to the budget office. Do I have a motion to adopt this recommended budget?
I'll move to adopt the budget as presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Hearing no nays, your recommended budget is approved.
Great.
Or adopted.
Thank you.
Great.
I will just want to say one more thing, that there may be small changes to the budget that happen after this because the mayor will propose a budget for some of the bureaus we interact with. And if any of those changes are significant, we'll brief you on them at the May session because the mayor's proposed budget will come out at the end of April.
So when you say brief, do we have to have a new motion then, if they change it?
We have never had a new motion, but again, it's an interesting question. You are the body that formally adopts the budget. There are always, I will warn you that if you want to do that, there are always changes that tend to be in like the $1,000, printing and distribution is going to charge a little bit more for color copies, and now we have to put this much more money in our budget. Little tiny changes are the norm. Sometimes there are big changes. Those usually flow out of police and fire budget decisions if we have big changes. So I'm not sure we have never readopted the budget, and no one's ever raised the question of whether you legally had to. We've put it in the category of incidental changes that had to be made to sort of accommodate other cities' budgets. And I don't know if...
Chip us an email if they do change stuff, so we're aware of what they're planning on changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've always updated at the May board meeting, but if that's getting a little late in the process, when those changes happen, yes, I can send those out. I assume you don't want to hear about the little, P&D change their budget $1,000 thing. But if there's anything significant, I can tell you one significant change right now that's coming. It's $150,000, not massively significant, but our general fund overhead number in the budget is $300,000. And that is a miscalculation that for some reason they can't fix until the proposed budget is released and they rerun the metrics, and it will drop to about $150,000, which is our kind of normal general fund overhead rate. So I know.
You addressed that somewhere in here, didn't you?
What?
I feel like I read that somewhere.
You are reading all of this stuff. I love it. Did you hopefully not at the dentist again this time.
Different doctor's appointment.
Yes, so that doctor appointment. So that is in the forecast document. I mentioned in the 27 pages of more than you ever wanted to know about the budget that change is coming. The general fund overhead model, it is complicated. They realized they grabbed the wrong metrics for us and ran them through. And they want to wait to rerun it until they rerun it for everything, which they'll do with the mayor's proposed budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we're on to information items.
Yep. The first information item, you asked me, Jennifer, to come back in and to review the public records and public records requests. Catherine and Elizabeth weren't here last time, so this will be new information. Brian and Jason will be a repeat. I do have some things in here where I attempt to answer or address some of the issues that the two of you brought up at the last board meeting. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So under the information, the first part of it is the addition that we made to the Trustees Handbook of Public Records. We did not address that in the prior editions. The city right now is going through an in-depth review of all the different boards and commissions that they have. You are a much more formal board, one of the most formal boards in the city. They have a lot of very informal boards and commissions, and they are trying to bring them up to the level that you are as far as knowledge of how to operate as a board and all the particular legal issues involved. And when we went through that, I realized we had nothing in our board handbook over public records and public records requests. So I added that, and that's why we're going over it this time. So just to refresh what you are, all of you are public officials as defined by state statute. You are therefore are covered by all state statutes and rules regarding public officials, as well as the city charter, city codes, and city rules regarding public officials. Part of that means is any of the documents that you approve as individual trustees or the board produces are considered public record. And those public records are defined by state statute. And I'm going to go through here this big laundry list of everything that could be considered a public record. It's any document that you approve or write or generate in the conducting of your business. It could include handwritten documents, typewritten documents, printed documents, photographs, any kind of recording, which is letters, words, pictures, sounds, symbols, or a combination thereof, and all papers, maps, files, facsimiles, or electronic recordings. Text messages are considered public documents. Documents, again, as I said, you've drafted here. Now, I tend to make a lot of notes here and here. These are public documents. So if you are making any notes up there, those are all considered public documents with that. Now, any document that you all produce, regardless of how you produce it or where you produce it, or on who owns the machine or the device you approve it on, is still considered a public record. So if you are generating emails, documents, or text messages on personal computers, pads, or cell phones, doesn't matter even if you own them, they are still considered public record. If you store them, any of these documents, on your personal devices, they are still public record. Just simply because you aren't using city machines or city phones, that doesn't cover you. So anything you do on behalf of being a board trustee or part of the board, you are generating a public document. So we have here. So what we do here is that when you all produce public documents, Fpdr, the Bureau, is responsible for archiving those for you. We're trying to take that away because, again, we're going to talk about here in a minute public record requests. We need to have a copy of all your documents issued, so if there's a public records request, we can do it. Plus, it's better to have us archive these documents than you do, So any emails that you send to me or Kathy or anybody at Fpdr, or any email sent by Fpdr to you, are already archived. You don't need to worry about making sure that we archive those for you. If you are sending emails or documents or text to another trustee or to a third party, you have to get the copy of those to us, and I'll go over that here in just a minute so we can keep track of that. The trick here for if you're doing emails is CC either myself or Kathy, or you can blind CC if you want to do that. That way we have the document, I've received it, so therefore it's archived, or you can print it out and send it to us or fax it to us, or however, get us a copy of that document or that email So we have it. So if you are doing text, you can forward those to us. You can print them out to us. You can convert them into email. If you need some help doing that, give me a call and I'll set you up with our technology person and they'll walk you through the process of how you can get email or text messages copied to other people. There's only two of us in the Bureau have city phones. Our text messages are monthly scanned by the city and they pull a copy of those off our city phones. They do not do that on personal phones. So it's up to you to get us a copy. If you receive an email or a text or a document from a third party asking you questions that are considered Fpdr Board of Trustee questions, those are considered public documents. Again, you need to get a copy of those. You can simply email those to me and Kathy, say I received this from Joe Smith, and send it to us and we can copy it for you. So it does take a little bit of effort on your part to get us copies of the documents that you have. So my recommendation is get those copies to us. If you're having trouble, give us a call and we'll walk you through the process of getting a copy of the email or text to us. Once you give us a copy of that document, delete it off your personal device. You're not destroying the record because we have the document we have, so the record's not being destroyed or hidden, but get it off your personal device. And if you really feel that you need to keep a copy of it, print it hard copy and keep it in a file folder. So if we ever need to say, hey, look, what kind of documents have you, pull out a paper file folder and here's what we have. This way it does some protection of your personal devices. It's not 100% guaranteed that they're protected, but if you can say, this is what FPDR told me to do, I follow this process and procedure with FPDR, most people aren't going to go asking what's on your phone. Now, Jason and Brian, you both do have access to city email. You may not use it because of the nature of your job. I will tell you there are ways that you can access that email from home without having a city computer. If you want some more information, give me a call and I'll hook you up with somebody that can show you how. It's a Windows 365. It's a web-based way to get into your email and stuff if you want to learn that, so we can help you with that.
Does that say, so if I use my personal device to access city email, is now all of a sudden that?
No, it's not, because what you're doing is you're accessing Windows 365 is a city network in the cloud. So you're accessing the cloud. All work you're doing is done in the cloud covered by the city. It's just, all you've done is got a keyboard that allows you to type and stuff on a city system. It won't, as long as you don't retain or copy what you're producing onto your system, you're fine. It is considered, it's not considered using a personal device when you go through and access it via Windows 365. It's just consider it's just a portal into the city system and allows you to use your own keyboard to do stuff with that. Any questions on what constitutes a public document or some good actions of how to get us copies?
Are we allowed executive sessions where we can have voice talk without having to record them?
Well, executive sessions in here, we do take minutes, but those are covered and they don't have to be, they're not considered a public record that can be given to the public. It's still
any discussion between any of the board members without any written context,
if you have a discussion one-on-one, so there's only two of you, you can do that. The second you get a third person in on that discussion, you have now conducted a public meeting, and everything in that public meeting is subject to public record.
Do we have executive amenity or?
The only time you have executive is that when you are talking over legal matters, and we actually have to declare in. If we are in a board meeting and we have a legal session, we have to read this script saying that this is covered under these Oregon statutes as an executive session. We move all people out and we can discuss that, and it's not, the minutes are not public record for that meeting. But if you guys are having side conversations on the side, just beware, if there's more than 3 of you having a conversation, you are conducting a public meeting.
3 or more.
What?
Not more than 3, 3 or more.
3 or more, excuse me, yes, 3 or more of you are meeting and discussing business. You technically are having a public meeting. And if you're not taking meeting minutes, if you're not telling the public that you're having the meeting, you are violating state public meeting laws.
And if we have a member come to us whether police, fire, or just a question for one of the board members, they email us for a question. We do not respond. We see them walking on the street, we can talk to them.
You can talk people face to face. That's right. I mean, if face to face, you don't have to create a record, you know, if you're talking face to face. But if they send an email to you, hey, here's a big issue I have, I'd like your help with it. The email that they're sending is a public record, but if you choose to meet face to face with them, you don't have to create a public record. Right. You don't have to record that meeting.
I mean, there's no limitations on what you're giving us. This is basic knowledge, and the thing that I've been trained on is the fact that, hey, anything you write or do is open.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to somebody, talk to them. It's okay to
yeah,
talk to others.
It's fine. You can talk with them. What we're just trying to say is, if you've created a document, that's what we're looking at. You can have face-to-face conversations with people. I'm not trying to make this any onerous than it has to be, but I will tell you, the reason why the city brought this up, they had a lot of the informal boards and commissions make huge mistakes. We're holding basically board meetings at their home after the formal board meeting. So they all would go to one person's house and continue the board meeting. That's illegal. You can't do that. You didn't announce it to the public. You didn't open to the public. You didn't generate meeting minutes, that kind of stuff. But, so you are a formal board, so you guys aren't going to fall into the traps for here. I'm just trying to make sure you are understanding what is a public record. I found out, researching, getting ready for this, that this note was public record. I've been here almost 4.5 years and did not know these notes were public record. So just trying to make sure that you understand that. And I've had, my staff has gone through the same training, trying to understand, especially when they're using stuff on their own personal devices, the impact they have on it.
So Sam, what's the process for retaining our notes? Should we scan them to your office?
We need to get back to you on that. That's Kathy and I are trying to work that particular issue out, how to do the notes. Okay. I mean, because all my notes would fill up 4 or 5 boxes, and they're going to be impossible to search for a public record request. But with that, but we'll get back to you specifically on what to do with your notes. Most of those are on paper, so I'm not worried about it. I don't see any of you with an iPad trying to take notes on an iPad here. Okay. So let's switch over here to public records requests. I included here a screen printout of the public records request website for the city. We route all our public records requests through this site. So when somebody calls up and says, I need this, we give them the link to this and say, resubmit that request through this site. The reason why we do that is the state in the last legislative session introduced tighter and more requester favored rules that we have to respond in 5 days. We have to do other particular things. So we have to track these. So the city says they're all coming through here, and somebody in the city attorney's office goes, whoa, this one's been sitting out here 7 days. Have you responded to it? So they'll call us up. So they're trying to make sure that we and all bureaus in the city are compliant with all the new legislation. And the legislation may get tighter and tighter, but that's why we use this particular form. So quick things to public records request. If somebody asks you for information and you know the information, gee, can I have a copy of the board book? Refer them to our website. We've got tons of stuff on the website, either under the board section or under the reports and records section on our site. You know, all this budget stuff is on there, but not only in the board book, but it's also published on the website under the budget reports. If you can find where the link is, you can recommend them to go to the link, or the easiest thing for you to do is bounce them over to Kathy or myself, and we will get them into this process. I doubt they will come to you, but there may be a chance that they do. When we get records requests, you know, if here all they're asked is to describe the request. They can't do blanket, you know, send me every piece of paper you've produced in the last 5 years. They have to be targeted to some extent. And that's part of our job for, you know, for myself or Kathy when we get these requests is we may have to call up the requester and get more clarification of what they want. Why do you want this? What can we do? I gave you an example last time. I had an attorney wanted us to get some information out of a whole bunch of letters we had sent to several hundred claimants over the past 5 years, and I said, what are you looking for? Because that would have required us to go into the city archives and pull out boxes of claims. It would have been a couple hundred hours of work on our part. He said, well, here's what I'm looking for. I popped out copies of 3 letter templates that we use, and I said, these are the letter templates. Is that enough? And so that took me 1 phone call and 5 minutes to set up an email, to attach these documents in an email to them. So we have the right to go in and talk with them and get more information. Now, when we do this, we only have to produce the records or documents requested. We do not have to analyze what's in the document. We do not have to create a new document. We do not have to create a new study for this information. If it's, here's the document, I'm going to give it to you. If we don't have the document that you're looking for, we don't have to give it to you. So that's what it is. Now, if they ask for certain data gets, you know, a little bit different. Data, we have a big data set that has all our claims and retirement information. If they ask for certain information and we have certain canned reports that we can run to extract information out of there for our own uses, or we have what we call a reporting tool that allows us to create an ad hoc report. If we can get the data that they want using either our canned reports or this ad hoc tool, we have to give them that data. We are not required to create new reports, not required to modify or get a programmer in to change the database or how the tool is run. So if we can do it easily, we do it. If not, we won't do it. Rarely do they ask you, I want to see all the stuff that you've sent on your phone. It's usually documents about a particular topic. And again, I'd call, what are you looking for? If they're sending odds, I'll question them a lot. But remember, you go back to the recommendation I gave you, get it off your phone, get it off your pad, get it off your computer, and you can honestly say it's not there with it. When we have questions or disputes with a requester, we go to the city attorney's office for guidance on what to do. We can charge fees for the time it takes to get it, but the fees have been contentious because there have been certain cities or bureaus that have charged thousands of dollars for requests, and people have challenged that, feeling that the fee was designed to get them to not request the document, to scare them away. I think the legislature has put some tighter controls on that, and there are a lot of ways they can get waivers from those fees. Sometimes we get what I call information requests. That is not a document request, and I'm trying to think of what it's like. What kind of claim trends are you seeing? We don't have a document with that. So what we can do is say, if I choose, I can decide to provide that information, but I don't have to. That does not fall under the public records request. And for most of the time, we attempt to give certain people the kind of information they want. Just if we can get it fairly easily, we'll do it. But that's not a public records request. And then the last thing is, should we not provide the requested records, take too long to provide the records, or the fee that we're charging is in dispute, the requester can appeal to the district attorney, the Multnomah County District Attorney. And the district attorney will then interpret all the statutes and then render a decision saying, yes, you've got to produce this, or no, you don't, or this fee's too high. They can tell us what to do. The district attorney tends to be very pro-requester, so we're not going to get a lot of shielding from there. If there's still dispute after the district attorney, some of these have gone all the way up to the Supreme Court with that. And there are some challenges here that the city council and some other information requested in another bureau is probably going to go to the Court of Appeals. A thing that I want to warn you about, it's a new issue that's popped up, is social media. If you're posting comments about Fpdr, that could be interpreted as being you as a trustee or pushing stuff out on it. That social media request, even if it's behind, you know, a private wall, is a public record. And we have right now one of our city commissioners is having a case been appealed to that, trying to define what social media is considered a public record and what is not. So this is, as technology goes, this is going to get muddier and muddier and muddier. So it's a lot of repeat here. It's some technical stuff. The biggest thing is if you're not certain what to do, there's some good guidance in this here, and maybe I'll try to summarize this guidance and send it to you in an email for some of the best practices for this. Give me or Kathy a call. We'll be glad to help you out. You likely will not be seeing public records requests. They all seem to come through Fpdr. The most we see are from the media, always associated either with police or fire chiefs that have left office. They always want to know how much they are making and how much we're paying them on monthly. And then occasionally, if there is a particular issue about a particular police officer or firefighter, sometimes they'll call us up and try to figure out, are they getting disability benefits? Are they getting retirement benefits? I will tell you there are certain criteria per the state statute of things that we will not release. Addresses, phone numbers, email addresses are the simple ones, but there any type of medical information we will not release, and the statute prohibits that. So any questions on this? It sounds scary, but I think it's pretty straightforward. Again, call me or Kathy will be happy to walk through with you, and then we'll get back to you on what to do with scratch notes and that kind of stuff, how we can keep those.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
For information requests,
Yeah.
that, information that isn't kept in the regular course of business.
Yeah.
You said that sometimes you will gather information. What's the criteria for deciding whether or not to produce a document in response?
That's what I feel like I want to do. It really is. If somebody asks an information request, we try to help people out. We're not trying to be stingy with information. Part of it, can we easily get that information? Can we easily put it together? A lot of times, Stacy will get it here for some budgeting and finance stuff. We can put together a reply fairly quickly. Sometimes if you get a sense, and I've only had this once, that there's something behind the information request, I will not do it. And then if I see, I always let my reporter from the media, always let their calls go straight through to voicemail, so I can then do the screening of when they leave me the voicemail. Do I want to get back to them? Do I want to give them the information they have with that? And I do get commonly I get requests from either Alan or Daryl, the union presidents, will ask me some information. I try giving it to them. I don't have to, we make our best judgments when and what to give to them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that. And then the next item, the summary of expenditures.
More budget stuff, people? Want any more?
Let's do it.
Sure. Stacy, more budget stuff?
I think I'll leave you guys alone. That's enough.
Does anyone have any questions?
No.
I don't.
No? Great.
And as you requested, this will always be moved up pretty much far. It won't be tucked in the last thing. We'll move it up in the information thing. So Fpdr updates, I did not really have anything this time. So the next one, item 4 for future agenda meetings. So March, we're going to talk over the benefit adjustment. It was moved up to the 20th, the third Tuesday, because the fourth Tuesday is during spring break. So it's always been traditional, and we shared that with everybody in November that we're going to bring this one up.
March 20th.
So it's March 20th.
I think it was the last meeting I asked if we could look at maybe getting the materials out quicker and.
We will, the budget was, because you hear we're madly getting it ready for producing next week. We will get out any of the benefit adjustment to you, try to get it out to you 2 weeks
Yeah, that's
before.
the one I was usually,
Yeah.
and did you say there's some new recommendations or something that you were?
It's not new recommend. We're going to take a different stance on how to present it to you this time. So it's more of just we're going to discuss more of just the recommendation versus trying to go through all the history and the past that we have done. So we want to streamline the presentation with it. We do have some newer, a couple of the, some people here will be the first time they've gone through it, so we'll do a little bit of background, but I don't think we need to go through the ad nauseum details of all the history that we've done in the past, because I think we've set a pretty much of a trend, and that's the tack that we will take, presenting it to you. Then May will be tax anticipation notes. You heard all about them. And if there's any follow-up discussion to benefit adjustments, we'll do that. Benefit adjustment goes into place July 1. The reason why we start so early in March, because in the past, it's taken 2 meetings to get through the benefit adjustment. In the last 3 or 4 years, it has not. And we can discuss, do we want to wait till May till we're closer, or is March okay? Either one's fine with us. with that. And so these are the ones we have on the agenda. Again, there are always going to be some things added to the agendas before then.
Thank you.
Okay?
So unless there are other agenda items that we don't have on the agenda?
Testifying anything?
No.
Okay.
Great. Then thank you, everybody. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Sam, I made questions in here. Do you want this?
What?